Have you ever been in a situation where your emotions hijacked your mind so completely that you said or did something you immediately regretted, knowing in that moment that you had lost control of the very thing that should be under your absolute command, your own responses? What if I told you that the ancient Stoics discovered 7 specific rules that act like an impenetrable fortress around your emotional center, making it virtually impossible for external circumstances to trigger reactions that betray your values or compromise your dignity? Tonight, we explore 7 transformative Stoic rules that will give you complete mastery over your emotional responses, turning you from someone who is constantly reactive into someone who chooses their responses with wisdom, grace, and unshakable inner strength. Before we embark on this journey that has the power to revolutionize your emotional landscape forever, I need you to engage with this content in a way that demonstrates your commitment to real change. Like this video, if you're tired of being controlled by your emotional reactions and ready to discover what true emotional sovereignty looks like. Subscribe to Inner Dominion, because we're building a community of individuals who refuse to be slaves to their impulses and choose instead to be masters of their own responses. Share this with someone who needs to remember that emotional control isn't about suppression, it's about conscious choice. Comment below with the situation that most frequently causes you to lose emotional control, because by the end of this exploration, you'll possess the mental tools to remain centered even in that exact scenario. These 7 rules have been tested by Roman emperors facing political betrayal, by slaves enduring unimaginable cruelty, by philosophers confronting persecution and death, and they will work for you if you apply them with the dedication they deserve. The first rule establishes the foundational principle that separates those who are controlled by their emotions from those who control their emotions. Create a deliberate pause between trigger and response. Marcus Aurelius taught that between stimulus and response lies the most sacred space in human consciousness, the space where you choose who you will become, rather than merely react to what has happened. When someone criticizes your work unfairly, when unexpected challenges disrupt your carefully laid plans, when people behave in ways that disappoint or anger you, your untrained mind immediately generates an emotional reaction based on years of conditioning and unconscious patterns. But the Stoic mind, trained through daily practice, creates a conscious interruption between external events and internal responses. In that pause, you ask yourself essential questions. Is this emotional reaction serving my highest good or enslaving me to circumstances beyond my control? Does this response align with who I want to be, or is it simply the path of least resistance? What would my most wise and centered self do in this situation? This single practice, the cultivation of conscious pause, transforms you from someone who is constantly reactive to someone who is consistently responsive, from someone controlled by circumstances to someone who chooses their own experience regardless of external conditions. The second rule addresses one of the most exhausting aspects of emotional reactivity and provides complete liberation from self-imposed suffering. Distinguish ruthlessly between what you can control and what you cannot control, then invest your emotional energy only in what is actually within your influence. Epictetus, who understood both literal and psychological bondage, taught that we are disturbed not by things themselves, but by our judgments about things, and our judgments are always within our control, even when nothing else is. When your business partner makes decisions you disagree with, you cannot control their choices, but you have complete power over your response to their choices. When market conditions affect your investments negatively, you cannot control economic fluctuations, but you can control your preparation for volatility and your strategic decisions moving forward. When family members behave in ways that trigger your frustration, you cannot control their behavior, but you can control your boundaries, your expectations, and your own actions within the relationship. The person who masters this distinction experiences something revolutionary. They stop wasting precious emotional energy trying to control the uncontrollable and discover vast reserves of power that can be directed toward what actually matters. This isn't resignation or passivity. It's the ultimate form of personal responsibility, taking complete ownership of your sphere while releasing yourself from the impossible burden of managing other people and external circumstances. The third rule introduces a practice that might initially seem counterintuitive, but proves to be one of your most powerful tools for maintaining emotional stability. Practice negative visualization regularly to build psychological resilience. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of difficulties, not to invite trouble or cultivate pessimism, but to build mental strength through careful rehearsal of challenging scenarios. Every morning, spend time considering what might go wrong in your relationships, projects, and plans, not to manifest problems, but to prepare your consciousness so that if difficulties arise, they encounter a mind that has already explored that territory. Visualize your most important relationship experiencing serious conflict, your primary income source being threatened, or receiving disappointing news about a project you've invested months developing. By mentally rehearsing these possibilities with clarity and composure, you accomplish something profound. You reduce their emotional impact if they actually occur because you've already faced them in your imagination and developed response strategies. When the real-life version unfolds, it feels manageable rather than catastrophic, familiar rather than shocking. This practice isn't about becoming cynical or expecting disaster. It's about building unshakable confidence in your ability to handle whatever existence presents while reducing the emotional shock that often accompanies unexpected difficulties. The fourth rule provides a powerful filter for maintaining emotional equilibrium in a world designed to trigger constant reactions. Before responding to any situation, ask yourself whether this will matter in 5 years. This simple question acts like a circuit breaker for emotional overreactions, immediately putting temporary frustrations into proper perspective. Most of the things that trigger intense emotional responses, the rude comment from a colleague, the traffic jam that makes you late, the social media post that offends your sensibilities, will be completely forgotten within days or weeks. Yet we often respond to them with the emotional intensity reserved for truly significant events. When you find yourself becoming emotionally activated by a situation, pause and honestly assess. Will this particular incident have any bearing on my life, relationships, or goals 5 years from now? If the answer is no, and it usually is, then the situation doesn't deserve an emotional response that could compromise your peace of mind or damage important relationships. This practice doesn't mean becoming indifferent to everything, but rather calibrating your emotional investment to match the actual significance of events rather than their immediate emotional impact. The fifth rule addresses one of the most transformative practices for developing emotional mastery over time. Maintain a daily reflection journal to observe your emotional patterns without judgment. Seneca wrote extensively to his friend Lucilius about the importance of daily self-examination, not to criticize ourselves harshly, but to develop awareness of our emotional patterns and triggers. Every evening, spend 10 minutes reviewing the day's emotional experiences. When did you feel most centered, and why? When did you lose emotional control, and what specific triggers were involved? What patterns do you notice in your reactions? This practice creates psychological distance between you and your emotions, allowing you to observe them like a scientist studying data rather than being completely identified with every feeling that arises. You begin to notice that certain situations consistently trigger specific emotional responses, that your reactions often follow predictable patterns, and that awareness itself begins to create space for different choices. The person who maintains a daily reflection journal develops what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about thinking, to observe emotions without being consumed by them. The sixth rule transforms how you relate to obstacles and setbacks, turning them from sources of emotional turbulence into opportunities for character development. Reframe every challenge as training for your emotional discipline. Marcus Aurelius wrote that our inner power reacts to events by accommodating itself to what it faces, turning obstacles into fuel like a fire that burns brighter when more material is thrown onto it. Every difficult emotion you experience, every situation that tests your composure, every moment when you feel overwhelmed becomes raw material for building psychological strength rather than evidence that you're inadequate or broken. When anxiety threatens to overwhelm you, it becomes practice in returning to the present moment and distinguishing between real and imagined dangers. When anger flares up, it becomes training in pausing before responding and choosing your actions based on principles rather than emotions. When disappointment arises, it becomes education in holding outcomes lightly while maintaining full commitment to your efforts. This perspective doesn't deny the reality of difficult emotions, but transforms your relationship with them from victimhood to mastery. The seventh and final rule synthesizes all the others into a way of being that makes you virtually immune to emotional chaos. Respond according to your values rather than your emotions. Your feelings are weather systems in the sky of consciousness, sometimes stormy and turbulent, sometimes calm and clear, always changing and ultimately temporary. But your values are like mountains beneath the sky, unmoved by atmospheric conditions, providing stable reference points for navigation, regardless of the emotional climate you're currently experiencing. When someone treats you unfairly, your immediate emotional response might be anger, hurt, or the desire for revenge. But when you've trained yourself to respond according to your values rather than your emotions, you pause and ask, what does integrity require in this situation? What would wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline look like in my response? Sometimes this means addressing the unfairness directly, but without personal malice. Sometimes it means maintaining dignified boundaries while refusing to engage in destructive conflict. Sometimes it means choosing forgiveness not because the other person deserves it, but because holding on to resentment serves no constructive purpose in your life. Living this way requires constant vigilance and daily practice because emotions are immediate while values require reflection, but it creates an internal stability that no external force can shake. People learn to trust you because your responses flow from consistent principles rather than fluctuating feelings. You develop unshakable self-respect because regardless of outcomes, you know you've acted in alignment with your deepest convictions about who you want to be. These 7 rules work together to create complete emotional sovereignty. You create deliberate pauses between triggers and responses. You focus your emotional energy only on what you can actually control. You practice negative visualization to build resilience. You filter potential reactions through the perspective of long-term significance. You maintain daily reflection to understand your patterns. You reframe challenges as training opportunities. And you respond according to values rather than emotions. When you master these practices, something extraordinary happens. You don't eliminate emotions from your life. That would be neither possible nor desirable. But you transform your relationship with emotions from slavery to partnership. Your feelings become valuable information rather than commands that must be obeyed. Your reactions become conscious choices rather than unconscious compulsions. Your responses become aligned with your highest aspirations rather than your lowest impulses. The ancient Stoics discovered something that our emotionally volatile culture has largely forgotten. True strength comes not from never feeling difficult emotions, but from maintaining your center regardless of what emotions arise. They understood that the mind, properly trained through daily practice of these principles, becomes like a skilled ship captain who can navigate safely through any storm because they understand both the sea and their vessel. As you prepare for sleep tonight, and whatever emotional challenges tomorrow may bring, remember that you now possess 7 of the most powerful tools ever discovered for emotional mastery. The only question remaining is whether you will commit to the daily practice required to make these rules a living reality rather than mere intellectual concepts. What situation will you handle differently when you apply these principles, and how will you begin building this emotional fortress starting tomorrow?